the base of this tiara slash headdress, I used 14 inches of 14 gauge galvanized steel wire, and I filed the ends already before I recorded this. I've marked it at half points and then 2 inches on either side. That way I will be able to better keep it symmetrical. I'm also going to be using a Swarovski crystal for the center. This is a Heliotrope color, and we're going to be hammering it for strength. For the additional wires, we're going to be using 16 gauge, 26 gauge, and 18 gauge copper wire. You will also need your cutters and your pliers, and these are some additional pliers that I will be using. Start by creating a V in the center with your pliers and your hands. Now I'm using my thumbs and my fingers to create some nice curves and shapes just to make it look nice. I went back a few times to just adjust it and make it as symmetrical as I could get it. Once you're finished shaping it and you like how it looks, then we're going to hammer it. Get it as flat as you can, but it's mostly just for strength and looks. This is what it looks like after it has been hammered, and I have curved it around just gently. It doesn't yet fit my head, but this will give me a nice curve to work on with the rest of the wire. I'm getting out my wires in preparation for cutting pieces. My 16 gauge is blackened. This is tarnish because I dipped it in liver of sulfur a long time ago, and I'm still using my roll. I'm measuring out 14 inches of the 16 gauge. This will be our strong and main decoration wire. I gave it a quick rub down so that my fingers don't get black while I work with it. Find and mark your center here, and I'm going to be making a big round loop with it, and to help me make this I am going to be using some bail making pliers. You can get these at most craft stores. I'm going to be using the 8mm size and then just opening up the loop so that the stone will fit into it. I want my stone to just sit on top of that wire, not fall through it. Here I was just kind of playing around with placement to see how I wanted it to be put onto it. I actually had not really planned this out before recording this video. I was just kind of winging it, but I had an idea in my head that I was just going to kind of go with. To help me hold the Swarovski stone on, I am going to be cutting about 7 inches of the 18 gauge, and I will be weaving it to the top of that loop. I cut about 2.5 feet of the 26 gauge copper wire. Put the ends of the 26 gauge wire together, that way you can find your center. And I'm going to be wrapping a couple of loops around the center of the 18 gauge. And I am just eyeballing this at first, but you'll see in a second that I then held it up against the ruler so that I could make sure that my little loops that I started with are in the center. Now comes the fun and awkward part of recording myself while weaving. And in order to weave, I was just carefully taking the 26 gauge wire around the 16 gauge wire, if that makes any sense. You just kind of watch what I was doing. Instead of sticking it through the loop, I was just kind of guiding it around the wires. But I would wrap it around the 16 gauge wire 2 times, and then back around the 18 gauge wire 2 times. And I was wondering if you guys could see the wire really well. I know some people were struggling with different backgrounds I was using, and I think that this countertop background is actually probably the best one, but I want to know your guys' opinions on it, if it makes it easier for you guys to see the wire. And I know the copper wire probably blends in a little, but just let me know what you think. I'm going to continue weaving just like that down the sides about halfway. When I was done weaving to the halfway mark, I just took the extra 26 gauge and just wrapped it around the 16 gauge like you see. Now you need to take your octopus and position him correctly where you want him to sit. I put the 26 gauge wires behind the steel base, as you can see, I hope, and I put the rest of the wires in front of the steel base. And I am going to be holding it in place while I take the 26 gauge wires and wrap them in front and over, and then through the loop, and then back down. That way I will be binding my little octopus to the steel base. I did this a couple of times to make it nice and secure. As you will be able to see, I am repeatedly having to center my loop into the middle of the base because it did just want to keep sliding around. So you'll see me do that throughout the creation process, but towards the end, once everything was bound down, it actually was very secure and I was very proud of it. Right now I am taking the sides and I'm going to be bringing them up behind the steel wire base, and again I'm centering my little loop. And then I'm wrapping the 16 gauge down in front and then back up again behind the base, and then creating a loop and bringing it back to the front. We're going to finish with a big curl right here. And repeat on the other side. Compare sides and adjust as you need to make them as symmetrical as you can get them. Here I'm just using my round nose pliers to make a big sweeping curl. After making the curl on this side, I noticed that I had a little bit longer curl on this side than the other, so I did use my wire cutters to trim off a teeny tiny little piece, and that was enough to make them symmetrical. Now for the first part holding the stone in, I'm just making a tight little curl going in and then out with the wire, as you can see. It doesn't hold it in just yet, but it will once I add the final piece. Adjust the wires as you need to make it as symmetrical as you can. Since these wires weren't very long, I decided to just curl them underneath that loop there, and I'm going to be finishing them by wrapping them once tightly around the the galvanized steel base. And I'm just using my pliers to push it through that little space right there and tuck it down. Pinch it tightly with your chain nose pliers, and this was really hard for me to do in front of the camera, so I did end up having to do this off of camera. And this is what you have so far once it's repeated on the other side. I hope you can see how I've tucked in those little ends. For our third and final piece, I cut 10 inches of 18 gauge wire, and we will be using our round nose pliers to make a loop in the center. Check the ends to make sure that your loop is centered, and then I'm going to finish the loop by crossing them over. I wanted it like a teardrop shaped loop. And then, to make another loop on top of it, I'm going to use my round nose pliers as best as I can to make another loop to cross them again. And you can see that it was like a little wonky, so I just used my fingers and twisted it to tighten it and make it straight. And now I'm going to hammer the bottom teardrop to give it a nice look. As you can see, I did curve the top pieces over, and I am looking now as to how I'm going to be positioning this on the headdress. I'm bringing my 26 gauge wires to the front from behind, because they were behind the 16 gauge, and I want them in the front of the 16 gauge. And then I'm going to be using them to wrap from behind to the front and through the loop. And you can see this in just a second. I'm adding my Swarovski crystal now because as I wrap this last piece in, it will be securing the stone. Then I'm going to be bringing my 26 gauge forward and then through the big loop to the back. And this is another one that wants to slide around and not stay centered, and I will be fighting with it the entire time I'm securing it, but like I said, it ended up looking pretty nice. Just make sure that you maintain it centered. I have to fix it a few times, but I got it to look pretty good. I wrapped the 26 gauge around this 18 gauge and the loop about 3 or 4 times. Making sure that it is centered one more time, I'm going to be taking my thumb and curving the side up. And at first I was thinking that I wanted to do a curl, but I saw how much extra wire I had, so I decided to push it through underneath the top wire and bring the wire to the back. And then I brought it back down over the top of the stone on the inside of the loop that was holding the stone in place and finished it off by making a curl. Repeat on the other side, and this side gave me a little bit of trouble, so you can just have fun and watch me struggle. Again, this loop was a little bit too much, so I just trimmed off a teeny tiny bit at the end to make them more symmetrical. Now we'll be adding beads to the front bottom V right there. I'm using a 2mm and a 4mm and another 2mm, and I strung them on one side, and then I took the other side and passed them through, and I will pull both wires taut simultaneously and do my best to keep the beads centered so that I don't kink up the wire and make any difficulties. To secure the wire, I pushed it through the back underneath the stone through that big loop again, being careful not to kink up the wire, and then I pulled the wire straight up to the top because we're going to be securing it on the wires at the top. Now wrap the 26 gauge once around just the top outer wire. Repeat on the other side to secure, and then adjust your center pieces to make sure that they are indeed centered and laying how you want them to. Now I'm wrapping the 26 gauge wire around both of these curled wires, both of the 18 gauge wires. And then once more through just the outer top wire. I will now be wrapping the 26 gauge wire in a spiral pattern down the outside wire until I reach the point where they separate. Here you can see I have the left side almost completely done, but my right side I have stopped so that I can show you how to continue. I did wrap it once, again around both wires, before I will continue down just the outside wire. I'm going to be wrapping it just once around that wire, and then I'm going to be wrapping the 18 gauge copper wire to the base steel wire. I'll be wrapping this 2 times to secure it. Now I'm going to be continuing my loose spiral wrap just on the steel wire all the way down until I reach the curl. And when I reach that curl, I will be binding it to the steel. I'm only binding the curl once to the steel, and then I will take the remaining tail of my copper and I am going to wrap it around the copper curl 4 times to secure it and finish my wire. Trim the ends and pinch it down with your chain nose pliers so that you don't have any scratchy pieces rubbing against your forehead, because that would be very uncomfortable. And then I did the same on my other side. I did have to finish it. And this is your finished creation, ready for oxidation and shaping. And I will say it looked really cool being solid black after I oxidized it, but it looked even better after I polished it. And I just shaped it with my hands at first, and then I put it around my forehead where I was going to wear it, and I shaped it a little bit more. But yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed this tutorial. I hope you guys make a ton of these, and don't forget to subscribe and hit the like button, and I will see you guys later.